This video is continuing the answer key for the study guide for the Unit 5, Part 2-3 assessment. We're on Section 3. Section 3 is over comparing functions, and when we compare functions, we have to do them in different ways, algebraically, graphically, and numerically, or in a verbal description or table. And in this case, we're going to look at this algebraically, graphically, and in a table. So it says determine which function has the greatest maximum value. So in this case, we're looking for a vertex point. Vertex and maximum minimum mean the same thing. A maximum is the highest possible point, where a minimum is our lowest possible point. So let's look at number one. Or let's look at g of x first. That's our easiest one to find our maximum point. Here, our maximum point is at 0.5, 4.5. Let's look at our table next. In order to figure out your vertex from a table, you have to look at the pattern of the y values. For instance, here we're going from -3 to 0. That is an increase. 0 to 1. That's an increase. 1 to 0. That's a decrease. So right now, in the table, our vertex is -1, 1. If we graph that on our graph that we have here, that's at this point right here, -1, 1. So as of right now, our greatest maximum value still belongs to g of x. But let's figure out what it is from the equation. In order to find the vertex from an equation, you have to solve the equation, or solve the expression -b over 2a and a function of -b over 2a. So to figure out x, we're going to do -b over 2a, which is equal to -2 divided by 2 times our a value of -1. And I pulled that 2 just from here. So then I have -2 divided by -2, which gives me +1. Now to find our y value, we're going to substitute that 1 into the equation anytime we see an x value. So in this case, we are going to put a 1 here and a 1 here. And notice how I use parentheses. You can type this right into your calculator as long as you use parentheses appropriately. So here I have 1 squared, which is 1, but I have a negative sign out front, so that becomes -1, plus 2 times 1, plus 4. -1 plus 2 is 1, plus 4 is 5. So the vertex in this case is 1, 5. And if we graph that, that would actually be off the graph. So determine the function with the greatest maximum value. The function with the greatest maximum value is f of x in this case. Let's move on to comparing these functions here. Determine which two functions have the same range. Range has to do based off of our y values. And in order to figure that out, we have to look at our vertex. So let's start with our graph first. The range of this function, our lowest possible value is at 1. So we're going to put a 1 with a bracket. This parabola increases forever. So we know that it's increasing to infinity with the parentheses. Let's move to the table. Our vertex, if you notice, is actually the same table from the previous question. So our vertex in this case is -1, 1. And since our y values are increasing, then decreasing, that means the parabola is going to look like this. Increasing first until it hits -1, 1, then decreasing after that. So we know that our lowest possible value is going to be -infinity, and our highest possible value corresponds to this y value right here of 1. So as of right now, these two functions do not have the same range. M of x. A rock is thrown into the air from the ground level. It reaches a maximum height of 6.25 meters after 2.5 seconds. So our point of our vertex is going to be 2.5, 6.25. 2.5 comes first because time is always independent. That represents our seconds. And height in meters represents our y value. In 2.5 seconds, the rock is 6.25 meters in the air. The meters, how high it is in the air, depends on how many seconds have gone by. So this parabola is going to be looking like this, because if we were to literally throw a rock, this would be the pattern. So our lowest y value here is -infinity, and our highest y value is 6.25. So it looks like none of these ranges match so far, so this one must be the one that matches something. What can we figure figure out from this equation here? Let's find the vertex. Our x would be negative b over 2 times a. Well, this function doesn't even have a b value, so it'd be negative 0 divided by 2 times negative 1, and that just ends up being 0. So right now our vertex is 0 comma some other number. Let's substitute a 0 into our equation. Negative 0 squared just gives us 0 plus 1. 0 plus 1 gives us 1. We know that this parabola opens down because our a value is negative, so the parabola is going to look something like this. Our lowest value is going to be negative infinity, and our highest value, y value, is going to be 1. So the two functions that have the same range are f of x and h of x. If you notice, they both have a range of negative infinity to positive 1. Let's move to section 4. This is what your assessment is going to be over tomorrow. So it's like I said, you're going to have 5 questions, and these are 4 of them right here. So we are going to have to solve by the methods stated. Let's try them out. The first method is by factoring. We are so used to this by now, and we're doing a really good job with it. X squared plus 16x plus 64. Since our a value is 1, we're able to factor immediately with our x model. We're looking for numbers that multiply to make 64 and add together to make 16. Those two numbers are positive 8 and positive 8. So our formula in factored form is x plus 8 times x plus 8 equals 0. Now we have to go one step further because the direction said to solve. So we're going to set both of our equations equal to 0. And both times we're subtracting 8 on both sides. We end up with x equals negative 8 and x equals negative 8. We only need to write it once. So my solution to this equation is negative 8, 0, meaning that it has one x-intercept, and that x-intercept is on negative 8, 0. Let's try this method using square roots. This is another one you're going to have to do in your assessment. Whenever we solve by square roots, we're trying to isolate the variable. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add that 5 to both sides of the equation. We don't need that anymore. So here we have x minus 4 squared equals positive 5. Now to get rid of the squared term, we're going to take the square root of both sides because those will cancel out. So we know with square roots, we always have a positive square root and we have a negative square root. So our equation now becomes x minus 4 equals positive square root of 5, x minus 4 equals negative square root of 5. You can use a calculator to figure out the square root of 5. What it is approximately 2.2. So we'll put 2.2 here and negative 2.2 here. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to add that 4 to both sides. So here, if we add 4 to both sides, we get x equals 6.2. So one of our zeros is 6.2 comma 0. And on the other side, we're going to be adding 4 to our negative 2.2. And when we do that, we get 1.8. So our other 0 is 1.8 comma 0. Don't ever be afraid to get fractions or decimals when you do solving for roots. Oftentimes you're probably doing it correctly. Always go back if you want to make sure. You could substitute this number into the equation and you should get an answer of 0. If you don't, you know you did something wrong. All right, completing the square, one of my favorite ways to figure out solutions to an equation. Let's go ahead and try this one. The first thing we need to do is we need to get that negative 3 to the other side. So we have x squared minus 4x is equal to negative 3. Now to complete the square, this is when we use those blocks. We have one x squared tile because there's one x squared here. We have negative 4x tiles, so we're going to put 2 on each side. How many dots do we need to complete the square? The answer is that we need 4 of them. So we're going to add 4 to both sides of our equation. From here, let's complete the square. Each side is x and negative 2. So in parentheses, that's what we write, squared equals negative 3 plus 4 is equal to 1. Again, to cancel out that square root, or that squaring, let's take the square root of both sides. And with square roots, we're going to have a positive and a negative answer. So we have x minus 2 equals 1, because the square root of 1 is 1, or x minus 2 equals negative 1. To find our zeros, we add 2 to both sides. We get x equals 3, or 3, 0. Or, when we add 2 to both sides, we get x equals 1, or 1, 0. Our last one is solving by the quadratic formula. This would be a great example to do that with. We could also factor by GCF too, but in this case, it's asking us to use quadratic formula. You will be given the quadratic formula if we were taking the milestone or just in any sort of assessment. So this is not something you have to memorize, even though I'm sure some of you did from the TikTok videos that you made. So our formula is x is equal to negative b. Well, b is already negative, so I'm going to write that as a negative 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 6 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Now, this is the part we really got to just take it slow, do it step by step when we simplify things. Here we have x equals a negative 6 gives us a positive 6, plus or minus the square root. Negative 6 squared is 36, not negative 36. That was a lot of errors that people made with that. 4 times 3 times 3. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 3 is 36, so we're subtracting 36. Divided by 2 times 3, which is 6. Keep simplifying. We have x equals 6 plus or minus 36 minus 36 gives us 0, divided by 6. Let's split up into two problems now. We're going to have x equals 6 plus the square root of 0, which is just 0 over 6. And x equals 6 minus the square root of 0, which is 0 over 6. Well, this was easy. Look, we're going to have the same answer. 6 divided by 6 on both of them, and that makes 1. So our solution here is 1, 0. If you have further questions, we can jump on Teams or you can email me for help.